following training is sponsored by the Niagara Library System. We serve our member libraries in Niagara, Orleans, and Genesee counties. Please visit your local library homepage and use your library card to get access to streaming videos, downloadable music, audiobooks, ebooks, and even more from the comfort of your own home. Thank you. Okay. Gaggle operates by a three-strike rule, meaning that mild rule violations could be flagged to school administrators if a student does it repeatedly. According to Gaggle, students who commit three strikes have their account privileges limited until a school official gives those privileges back. It's unclear if a student would lose email privileges in those situations, since it can be necessary for communicating with teachers and completing assignments. Okay. Now, Sarah Roberts is a professor at UCLA, and she says they're talking about three strikes rules and other kinds of quasi-judicial language. Roberts said these framings, we know that three-strike rules are not particularly held in high regard in places like California, where they came from, and yet they're being replicated and seamlessly built into the architecture, the AI of these platforms and their entire logic base. My sense, Sarah Roberts says, let me scroll up here so we can see this. My sense about this particular suite of products and services is that it's a solution in search of a problem, Sarah Roberts says, which is to say that the only way that the logic of it works is if we first accept that our children ought to be captured within a digital system, basically from the time they're sentient until further notice. Okay, in my notes there, I like Sarah Roberts. That must be the name, something like that. They've also realized, they've discovered that some students don't realize that they're using inappropriate language. Chris Gilliard talks about, he's an English professor at Macomb County Community College, says these are children, they're supposed to be exploring and learning, and they are supposed to have the ability to make mistakes. Absolutely. I've mentioned before, some of the stuff that I thought or the ideas that I had have certainly changed as I've gained more life experience. So, okay. Gaggle told BuzzFeed News here that it recommends school districts get permission from parents and students before they use the company's tools to monitor them. Gaggle provides a choice to opt out. But since it works with the required school services, email accounts, etc., it's unclear how that would work. How would you even opt out of it? Okay, opt out. You can't opt out, okay? Smoke and mirrors, it's the nicest phrase that I can think of for this nonsense. You cannot opt out of Gaggle because you cannot opt out of student Google or Microsoft accounts. Also, please don't think that Apple is out of this discussion. They may not be in the same stratosphere as Google and Microsoft, but they monitor their own Apple accounts to such a high degree that this is nearly comparable. So Apple is not out of this discussion, even though I haven't been talking about them. Apple does it, but they do it in a different way. Okay. Continuing on, once a school district buys Gaggle services, the students do not have a school-friendly alternative. Going back to IGO, everybody would nearly line up behind the thing that saving a young person's life is worth it, IGO said. But this is always the argument that is made about any kind of surveillance that has to do with crime or destruction or violence. We cannot simply just turn over when that explanation comes along. We need to think about the consequences of using these kinds of surveillance technologies on students, and IGO is right. According to the 500 pages of email from the school district, many of the documents flagged by Gaggle appear creative or expository. Items flagged for demonstrating a risk of suicide or self-harm often had titles like poem portfolio, possible poems, narrative essays, and narrative or common app college entry essays. One of the things Gaggle is teaching is not to share things, which is presumably the opposite of what many mental health professionals would say. IGO said, if a student is afraid of being interviewed by school administrators, they may shut themselves off entirely from adults. It's a little bit cynical also to waive student suicides in front of people to try to get them to buy into Gaggle, Roberts said. I have more faith in relationships that could be built locally and interpersonally than far removed through content moderators or through for-profit, revenue-driven systems in terms of thinking about safety of children. let me again move here. Samuel Fasulu talks about escalating a student's mental health treatment by hospitalizing them or calling the police can be risky if poorly timed. These escalations could worsen a student's symptoms. If it really helped to escalate, Fasulu says here, we would escalate all situations. The reality is that there are what's called iatrogenic effects in healthcare, which is the negative impact as a result of receiving treatment. It's not necessarily bad, but it's just that sometimes treatment increases the various symptoms you're actually trying to treat, which is true, iatrogenic effects. It can't be used. Things like Gaggle and other surveillance tools can't be used as the end-all be-all, which is what I think people are often looking for, Fasulu says here. But doing right by students isn't easy or cheap. Gaggle, like any platform whose success requires ongoing growth, faces issues similar to Facebook or Twitter when it comes to moderating at scale. AI-dependent moderation is clunky, and good moderators require training, reasonable pay, and emotional support. Like I mentioned, Vice did an interview where people were they burn out, they quit the job because there's so much horrible content that they're looking at. And the content moderators, are not looking at all the content in context, they're only looking at the worst stuff. All of this emotional support, reasonable pay, training, they all impact the company's bottom line, and then adding onto that student privacy, the expiration date of the data, all of that. Gaggle is not cheap, all right? And going back to Sarah Roberts here at the end, Roberts said that she fears tools like Gaggle could be used disproportionately as a stand-in for a larger staff of counselors at poorly funded school districts. She said that human support services like these could build relationships and trust with students and perhaps prevent issues from escalating rather than simply responding to them. I think this is a question of values, and it's a question of how we value our young people. It's a question of where we collectively as a society want to spend money, Roberts said. And it was mentioned that it's, we can't even get on board to fund school lunches, and yet we're going to give massive amounts of money to enrich this company that is spying on our kids. And again, that was a quote from Sarah Roberts. I'm going to wrap this up now. Interesting stuff to me. I hope you found it too. Take care. We'll see you in the next one. Bye now.